Hello, everybody. I'm Luke. I'm really excited to be coming at you again with some more of the good news from Nick's World and from us at Determinate Systems. I'm speaking to you right now from the lovely Marche region of Italy, as I'm here for a good friend's wedding. These Italian weddings are really rough on me, so but you know I survive somehow. Our last few webinars have been about Flake Hub and Determinate Nix, respectively. And if you remember, our very first webinar many months ago was about best practices for using Nix at work. I even recognize some of you from these past talks, so thank you for tuning in again. This time around, I'm going to change gears a bit. I'm going to turn the microscope inward, and I'm going to take a look at how we use Nix as a company, and actually how we don't use Nix as a company, because we should probably know a thing or two about that. The goal here isn't really to promote any of our tools or products per se, like other times. It's really more just to provide some insight into how our stuff is built and into some of the choices that we've made. And we hope, of course, that it gives you some ideas about stuff to build or ways to transform workflows in your own Nix-powered organization. So what does a company like Determinate Systems use Nix for? Well, you may be surprised to find out, like I said, that there's a lot of stuff that we do use Nix for that you would expect us to use Nix for, but also some areas where we could use Nix, but we actually don't, because for us, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. But let's start with what we do use it for. So first and foremost, we use Nix for all of our development environments. And this is, of course, a core indispensable use case for Nix, and we take full advantage of it to eliminate entire categories of dependency-related problems. So basically, we have Nix-based development environments in every single one of our repos. On a daily basis, I personally jump between about 8 to 10 repos, I would say, perhaps, but I would say that we probably have something like 25 to 30 repos that we as a company are actively working on at any given time. I personally use Durenv because I love that auto magical feeling that it provides, where I CD into a repo and everything just works without me thinking about it. But Durenv does impose a bit of time overhead when you navigate between repos, because Nix has to do some evaluation or maybe fetch some things from a cache. I personally think that the overhead is worth it, but not everyone on our team does, so we keep Durenv totally optional. The end effect of having these Nix-based development environments across the board, of course, is that everything just works across all these different platforms. I personally am full-time Mac OS. A few people are full-time Linux. Some people have multiple machines and need to switch back and forth because of the specific roles they fulfill. And of course, because things need to run not just on our workstations, but also at the CI level and across so many repos and projects and areas of concern, our tolerance for gaps and idiosyncrasies and little mismatches is essentially zero. We cannot afford to mess with dependencies or make people on our team check the README to see what they need to have installed. But with Nix, project level dependencies are a non-issue, and this is a problem that we literally just forget exists throughout so much of the industry. In some larger repos, we actually split things into multiple development environments, and this is something I do recommend because it can reduce the amount of work that Nix needs to do to activate a given environment. So you can imagine a case where there's some set of packages you need for your CI checks and some completely different set of packages you need to build a web app. And with Nix and Flakes, those can be separate dev shell outputs. And this is a great way of mitigating kind of the only not great thing about Nix development environments, which is evaluation time. Next up, we use Nix to build all of the packages that we distribute to the public and also all the packages that we circulate and use internally. And this includes bigger things like web servers and Determinate Nix itself, but it also includes some smaller things like shell utilities and helper scripts and some other things that we use across projects. We are generally a Rust shop, which we talk about a lot, and we use Rust for pretty much everything we can get away with. As some of you know, the Nix and Rust story is really rock solid, and I'll say more about this a little bit later. We also use Go in a few places, mostly in places where we have to, like when we're building Terraform plugins. And the Nix story with Go is really rock solid as well. And finally, we do have some other some analytics utilities and scripts and some other stuff in Python and a few other random languages kind of spread throughout our organization. So yeah, development environments, packages, nothing too surprising just yet. Not everyone loves Docker and the whole concept of containers, but personally I do. And with Nix, you get not just reproducibly built container images, but also very lean and compact ones. And you never have to touch Docker files or use the Docker CLI mess with, BuildX or anything like that. Surprisingly, I'll say more about this in a minute, but we actually run all of our core services as Docker images, including Flake Hub, which, yeah, well, I'll say more about this in a minute. The containers we build with Nix generally aren't anything too fancy. They're mostly just thin wrappers around Rust and Go binaries that we package with Nix. Although occasionally we have cases where we need some interoperable set of tools in a production system. And of course, Nix enables us to put arbitrarily complex runtime closures inside of them. So, maybe we have some web server, but we also need to make calls to OpenSSL or a Python script or something like that. And this is all totally transparent with Nix. Finally, there's some kind of non-standard areas where we use Nix. One example is PDFs. So we write a bunch of different PDFs to give to our existing customers and to prospective customers. And we use a great Rust-based LaTeX replacement called Typist for that. Typist spelled Typst. And with Nix, we can build our PDFs reproducibly in a nice ergonomic language that's kind of vaguely reminiscent of Markdown. And this is a really nice win for us that Nix makes possible. I strongly recommend checking out Typist at typist.app. And there's a great Nix library for building documents using Typist called Typix. And that has really been a joy for us to use. We also use Nix to build some special ISOs that we distribute directly to some of our customers and partners. And finally, we occasionally do some pretty complex static site generation stuff using Nix, where Nix basically takes in a bunch of files from a bunch of different flakes and repositories and puts them in a directory where they act as structured data. And then we use some static type site generator tool to build static HTML. I should note that in all three of these cases, we looked at the problem at hand. We judged that Nix was a clear win over other alternatives, and we went for it. But there are also plenty of cases where Nix is actually overkill for us, and that's what we'll turn to now. So we don't always use Nix. We strive to be thoughtful about our choice of tools, and even as one of the main companies in the Nix space, we often reach for other solutions. Number one, the developer workstation configuration. At the company level, for our macOS folks, of which I'm one, we don't have any Nix Darwin configuration that we require employees to apply, and we're all free to set up our own machines as we wish. There are certainly organizations in which you may want your devs to have that same freedom, which you may not want your devs to have that same freedom. But at this stage in our life as a company, we don't have any such mandates. The same goes for Home Manager and NixOS. Again, all of our employees are free to configure their workstations and their dot files and their IDEs and all that stuff as they wish. And a lot of us use these tools, workstation management tools like this, but not all of us do. So if people prefer Homebrew or plain old dot files or more procedural approaches, that's wide open. So perhaps surprisingly, one of the major Nix use cases is one that we, at least at the organizational level, have opted to forego. We also do not use Nix to build JavaScript things like websites or web apps. Now, we do use Nix to create development environments for a JavaScript project. So we'll have a dev shell with NPM or PNPM or some other tools like Biome.js. And so we do have pinned versions of all of our tools, but we don't ever Nix build JavaScript things. This is largely because we're just kind of not in love with Node to Nix or any of the other tools that convert JavaScript dependencies into Nix dependencies. We generally find those tools to be kind of buggy and sometimes a bit slow. And although we're open to better tools in the future, right now, it just doesn't feel like much of a win for us. So instead, what you'll find in our JS repos is something familiar to all JS devs. You've got a package.json, a big old node modules directory, and we install our dependencies using npm install, just like most of the rest of the ecosystem. And when it comes to deployment, we've also opted to keep this very simple. So we have some build script defined in package.json and on Netlify, which is our preferred deployment and publishing platform for web stuff. We just run that script, produces an output directory, and Netlify handles the rest. So this is an area where we looked at the existing tools and platforms, and we liked what we saw, and we sprinkled in a little bit of Nix to provide the right packages, and then Nix just kind of quietly gets out of the way. Some other things we don't use Nix for, GitHub Actions. So most of our GitHub actions like Nix installer action and flake checker action we actually package and run as JavaScript. And like the web stuff I mentioned in the last bullet point, we don't nix build that JavaScript. Instead, we write up some TypeScript, we run a packaging script, npm does its thing, and we end up with a runnable index.js file at the end of the process. We could conceivably use Nix for this, but it's always felt like Nix mostly got in the way, so we opted not to use it. You may also be surprised to find out that we do not run NixOS in production at Determinate Systems. We do provide a NixOS module to use Determinate Nix on NixOS, and we do provide NixOS AMIs, that is Amazon Machine Images, with Determinate Nix and some other stuff installed. So we as a company absolutely support NixOS, and we support NixOS users however we can, but we don't actually run any NixOS VMs in production. We all like NixOS a lot. Many of us have contributed to it, especially Elko, but for our needs, it just doesn't make a ton of sense at the moment. Like I said, we package our services as lightweight Docker images, and we run them on AWS. And so far, that has met our needs just fine. Someday, we might need more granular control at the OS level, or we might need to have systemd available to orchestrate multiple long-running processes or something like that. But for now, we're good. So yeah, this is another example of looking at a prime Nix use case, assessing the benefits, and opting for other tools. So I've told you what we don't use Nix for. Seems like a good time to get back on Team Nix and talk about how we do use Nix, because despite not using NixOS and a few other things, we unsurprisingly use Nix a great deal. First, we use Flakes absolutely everywhere. In Determinate Nix, our downstream distribution of Nix, as many of you know, Flakes are stable, channels are well on their way to full deprecation. So we as an organization are all in on Flakes and what they provide. So we get pinned revisions to everything everywhere. We get the nice discoverability benefits of Flakes, actually telling you what they output. And the more we use Flakes, the more useful they get because of how interdependent all of our projects are. Now, as some of you may know, Flake Hub has a concept of private Flakes. Now, because we use Flakes everywhere, we also use our own Flake platform everywhere. So all of our Flakes are public to Flake Hub, and all the Flake outputs that we conceivably need are published to Flake Hub cache. And because Flake Hub has federated authentication built in, we basically log into Flake Hub just like any other Flake Hub users out there, and it all just works. Our development environments and our CI runs are nice and snappy, and I really only think about this every 90 days or so when I need to refresh my Flake Hub token, and that whole process takes me about 30 seconds. Now, as some of you may know, Flake Hub has a concept of private Flakes, which are those Flakes that are accessible only to people authenticated with your organization. We use private Flakes quite a bit, especially for our main services like Flake Hub and Flake Hub Cache. But private Flakes are also great for us because it enables us to share Nix Flake outputs with other companies and organizations without giving them access to our source code. Now, upstream Nix, as it is, doesn't provide a Flake access model that allows for this because you're basically kind of restricted to, to sort of Git and SSH and that kind of authentication model. Whereas Determinate Nix and Flake Hub do. And this has unlocked a lot of great ways for us to share tools and prototypes and other things with other entities. In terms of Flake versioning, we use multiple approaches. For most of our internal things, we use what are called rolling releases. And this is where basically we publish a new release every time we merge a pull request, although there are other models available. So with rolling releases, you end up with lots and lots of releases. And we like this for internal things because we mostly just care about the latest version. And we're not really concerned about major, minor, patch, et cetera, since we control the entire development lifecycle, and semantic versions don't really add all that much for us. For things that we release to the public, though, semantic versions like 1.2.3 or 0.18.1 or whatever matter a lot more because they convey more meaningful information. So you can tell people that version 1.2 of a tool is good, but 1.1 has a nasty regression. And that's, as opposed to telling somebody, 0.1.12345 is good and 1.346 is bad. It's just a much better model. So you'll find that for tools like FH, which is the Flake Hub COI, or Flake Checker and Determinate Nix itself, we use tagged Flake releases for all of these. Now, someday we may want to have tagged releases for our own internal stuff as well, but we're just not quite at that level of organizational complexity yet. So like I said before, part of the benefit of Flakes is that you can create pinned, transparent dependency graphs of whatever complexity you need. And we do this a lot. To give an example, if you want to run Flake Hub locally, if we want to run Flake Hub locally on our workstations, we also need to have the Flake Hub cache package available, which is output by a separate Flake. So we have Flake Hub cache as a Flake input to Flake Hub. We add that package to the Jev shell, and that's it. Another example is that the NixOS AMIs that we publish provide both determinate Nix and FH, the Flake Hub CLI. We add those flakes as Flake input to the AMI's Flake, we pull in the desired packages, and we're off to the races. This kind of thing would theoretically be possible without Flakes, but it would be very challenging to ensure that every team member had the same pinned versions of everything. And in order for us to know what's in each project in the first place, we'd have to put that in the README or in a wiki or something, or make people read code. But of course, with Flakes, we don't have to. Now, this whole way of doing things, where you have a bunch of different projects that all rely on each other, generally goes against the kind of Nix packages philosophy that has reigned for well over a decade in the Nix ecosystem. We certainly use Nix packages a lot because it'd be silly not to, but our own workflows benefit enormously from this more decentralized approach. So we don't have a mono repo with all of our Nix stuff in it or anything like that. These dozens of different projects all work together harmoniously, and we really can't imagine doing things any differently. Like I said, we're generally a Rust shop, and the combination of Nix and Rust has been absolutely killer for us. But to be a bit more specific, we generally use the Crane library for package builds. We find that Crane tends to be much better at incremental builds than competing libraries, which saves us a ton of CI time. We also find that Crane produces much leaner closure sizes than its competitors, and so we've basically decided to standardize on Crane at the org level. For providing Rust tool chains, we use a library called Phoenix pretty much everywhere. I find that it's really nice for things like selecting stable versus nightly, for selecting a minimal tool chain in cases where I just need Rust C and cargo. And it's also really nice and trivial to include Clippy and Rust format and some other things when you need them. So I do strongly recommend checking out both of these libraries, and I'm sure the other team members would do it as well. Like I mentioned in the first webinar, we don't use Flake libraries like Flake utils or Flake parts. Now, this is somewhat controversial because some people do use them and like them, and I can imagine use cases for them, maybe. But for us, we've just never needed them, and I personally see them as unnecessary dependencies that will haunt and pollute your flake.lock files forever. Instead of Flake utils, we have a single Nix array for our supported systems, and then we have a single for each style function that iterates over them, and that's always been enough for us. Also, you'll notice here that we generally only support 2 systems, at least for our internal things, x86 for Linux and ARM for Mac OS. And only supporting 2 systems in our flakes generally means substantial reductions in CI time, and of course, reductions in energy usage and a lot of other things. So if you're just relying on flake utils standard systems or default systems or whatever, and it's covering systems that you don't actually need to support, you might be able to score some easy wins by cutting this list down to an absolute bare minimum. Another best practice that we follow is that we try to keep our flake dependencies nice and fresh. That way we get security updates and all of that good stuff. For Nix packages, we use our tool Flake Checker to ensure that the Nix packages dependency isn't more than 38 days old in our flakes. And we set fail mode to true to ensure that if Nix packages is older than 30 days, then the CI run fails. This is a quick and dirty 2 lines of YAML, and it generally runs in about a second. So this is a nice, easy win for us. As a kind of complementary tool, we use update flake lock to bump our flake dependencies once a week. This can be a little bit annoying across so many repos because we have to click approve and do that whole thing. But I would say, given our security commitments, it does make a lot of sense for us. Nix onboarding. So we don't have a ton of employees, just 8 total right now, but Nix onboarding is something that we take very seriously internally. Why is that? Well, it's because we are essentially right now the company or one of the companies that's trying to bring Nix to the enterprise. And when you're trying to bring a tool like Nix to the enterprise, tool that's transformative, but also fundamentally pretty complex, you need to provide smooth onboarding, not just to people who already know Nix, or the people in the organization who are expected to sink a bunch of time into learning Nix. You need to make onboarding smooth for everybody. So ordinary engineers who spend their days writing Python and Java and Rust and whatever need to be up and running with Nix within 5 minutes, which is basically our rough goal. To that end, we provide first-class support for both Linux and Mac OS, and internally we're committed to having a significant number of employees on both systems at all times. So to make sure that we can onboard other companies, we make sure that everyone at Determinate Systems installs and uses Determinate Nix. We're currently mostly engineers, but we have currently 2 employees who aren't or who don't do engineering work significantly, and they have to install Nix as well. And if they can't easily do that, then we need to fix something. In general, we kind of see our employees as the first over the wall when it comes to Determinate Nix. Most of us run a canary version of Determinate Nix in our daily work, and that's fun because we get access to juicy new functionality, but before everybody else in Nix world gets to. But the obvious drawback is that we're exposed to the paper cuts before anyone else. And that can mean lost productivity as we suffer through bug fixes and the usual development churn. But at the end of the day, if Determinate Nix and FlakeHub and the others aren't working for us and making our workflows better, then they're going to be dismal failures in the world at large amongst companies that aren't full of people that spend their working lives thinking about Nix. So we take that very seriously. Finally, all employees are required to go through the Nix tutorials that we created in the form of Zero to Nix. And if our folks, including the less engineeringly inclined folks, can't get through Zero to Nix, then we need to fix it. Because if they're sitting next to Elko and Graham and others and can't get through the tutorial, then other organizations are also unlikely to succeed with these tools. Okay, so I've covered areas where we use Nix and areas where we don't. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the stuff that isn't Nix, but that we've kind of built around Nix to support both ourselves and the Nix community at large. A hugely successful tool for us has been something called install.determinate.systems, or IDS for short. This is basically a pretty straightforward Rust web server that wraps a handful of Amazon S3 buckets. And it enables us to serve artifacts in a highly granular way. So those artifacts can be tarballs or executables or any actual bytes on disk that you would put in object storage. So we upload lots and lots of different artifacts to this server. And then what we can do is we can pull artifacts for specific tagged versions, for specific pull requests, for specific branches, for specific Git revisions, and much more. To give an example, we might need to pull FH, the FlakeHub CLI tool, for pull request number 175. So let's say a customer has a problem, the changes in pull request 175 might fix that problem, and we can just give them a URL, they can curl it, and they can try it out locally. Another feature of IDS is that we set it up to provide percentage-based rollout. And this enables us to do things like roll out a new version of a tool to only, say, 10% of users chosen at random. And then over time, we can slowly ramp that up to a full 100% based on testing and feedback and all of that. And we get this without using any kind of external feature flag system or anything of the sort. These artifacts that we're serving, they're not Nix derivations, they're not Flake outputs, they're just bytes on disk, so they're not Nix. But the benefits of having IDS have been immense, and I seriously think it's probably been our most transformative and internal tool. GitHub Actions. So we build and support a bunch of GitHub Actions, most of which began their lives as kludgy bash scripts, as in so many other cases. But as the number of actions grew and as the user base of some of these actions expanded into the tens of thousands and the millions of runs per year, these kludgy bash scripts just weren't going to cut it for us anymore. So we decided that we wanted to do them in a real programming language, and in actions, that means TypeScript, because GitHub has some really nice libraries for this. So we built our own TypeScript library called DetSysTS that has a bunch of helper functions and also, very importantly, some utilities for pulling artifacts from IDS. So we have Nix building packages that we then upload to IDS that then get downloaded during GitHub Actions runs, which is a very sort of hybrid setup, but I think it's worked great for us across many millions of CI runs. We even generate and publish docs for DETS if you want to check those out. We basically treat GitHub Actions as a production service, and I think that that's the right way to think about it. Finally, another non-Nix thing by definition is the release flow behind Determinate Nix itself. So when we cut a new release of Determinate Nix, we also need to push updates to our NixOS AMIs, to the Determinate Nix installer, to IDS, and to about 10 other things. And this is such a complex process that we literally call the repo that powers this spaghetti, seriously. To tame, and you know, these things all need to happen in the right order, and it's really complicated, but it's kind of fun too. To tame some of that complexity, we designed a release system around a durable execution engine, and workflow orchestration engine called Temporal. We basically wrote a workflow using the Temporal Go SDK that we trigger whenever a release is ready. And that workflow is basically responsible for opening pull requests against the right repos in the right order, and it notifies us of the project of the release cycle in Slack. Importantly, this workflow prompts us for human intervention when necessary, for example, to approve PRs. And overall, it's been a dramatic improvement over, say, a checklist in a README or something like that. Again, this is another thing that isn't Nix and couldn't possibly be Nix, but it's been enormously beneficial for our workflows, and we hope that those benefits have trickled down to some Determinate users at large. So let's round this out with some of the big juicy takeaway lessons that we as a company have kind of stumbled our way into over the past 3 years as we figured this all out. First, going back to IDS really quick, we have learned that serving built artifacts in a fast, reliable, granular way is hugely important for what we're trying to accomplish. If you're a company operating the infrastructure space, especially, I strongly recommend giving this a lot of thought and coming up with a solution that isn't just satisfactory, but that feels like a big qualitative victory. We weren't expecting to have to build this when we started, but the need became clear very early on, and the investment has proved its value over and over. Second, put a lot of effort and sweat and tears into platform support. For us, GitHub Actions has been the biggest investment for us so far, but we plan to expand that to many others and not just the CI platforms. Admittedly, platform support began as a bit of an afterthought for us with, you know, our pluggy bash scripts and whatever, but the consequences of treating it as such became apparent very quickly. So like it or not, you need to become an expert, and your integrations need to be treated like first-class production systems. Next, don't overuse tools, even Nix. As I made clear, we use Nix for a ton of stuff, but we always keep a kind of critical distance from it. In cases where the benefits aren't crystal clear, or in the presence of better alternatives, we're happy to step back and let other tools and platforms take over. And kind of building on that same idea, we generally like to think backwards from the value to users when making decisions about how to do things and when and how to use Nix. So we start with the production services and the tools we provide, not just Flake Hub and Determinate Nix, but also our CI tools, which again, we see as production services. And from there, we think backwards to deployment. Does Nix help us here? Well, in our case, the deployment story generally doesn't have a lot of Nix involved. We use Netlify, and we use Terraform. We use AWS's container orchestration engine. But we don't use NixOS for our services, and we don't package any of our JavaScript stuff with Nix. And so Nix is essentially absent from the deployment part of the equation for us. But then we move backwards to building and packaging, and here Nix is a major player for us. We build all of our Go and Rust packages with it. We built our Docker images using Nix, but we don't build any JS stuff with it. So it's a bit of a mixed picture. But then we drop down to the development level, and of course, Nix is essentially mandatory here, and there's pretty much never not a reason to use it in any project. And I think that this kind of sequential mode of thinking has been beneficial for us because it keeps us from, like I said, over-investing in and over-committing to certain tools, including Nix. If we had some kind of top-down directive to use Nix for everything everywhere, then I think that we would be legitimately less well off as an organization, even as the Nix company. So keep it flexible, folks. That's thank you very much. That's all for today. Make sure to stick around for the Q&A. If you want to send us an email about feature requests or support or like whatever kind of stuff, send it to hello@determinate.systems. If you want to connect with us on Discord, you can see the link for that right there. And yeah, we look forward to seeing you all for another webinar in a couple weeks.
All right, fantastic, Lou. Thanks so much for that. I'm going to give you a break and let you look at the questions before I start asking some to you. Give you a little bit of a breather there. But I think one of the things that's is that we are honest about when not to use Nix and that we don't use it everywhere and we don't mandate it everywhere. And I know one of the things that came up a bit in the chat and also a bit in some of the Q&A is around a little bit of surprise around Nix OS and our lack of use in some cases there. I know some of our team members are using Nix OS personally, and we do have some use, but it's maybe not as much as other expected. There was a kind of a question and a comment here from Tyler, saying, is the reasoning behind eschewing NixOS in favor of shipping containers around primarily that most modern platforms expect to run container images rather than managing entire operating systems? Like Fly or K8s being, less overhead than wrangling bare EC2 instances. Do you have any thoughts or comments on that?
I would say actually no. If we needed to run full-blown NixOS VMs, we have enough internal, Terraform, whatever knowledge, and we have several folks on the team who have done NixOS deployment stuff in the past. We 100% could do that. So I would say it's actually not necessarily like a usability issue for us. It really just boils down to the fact that the services that we are running right now are basically just like a static binary with just enough wrapping around it to get it to work. And that's the reasoning for now. But like I said in the webinar, it's entirely possible that at some point we will run things that we'll graduate beyond that, and we'll need to have more granular OS control. We'll need to run multiple processes. We'll need to do things that Docker images are not good at. But for now, Docker images are fine.
Yeah. So here's one related to that. I mean, what happens when we do need to run our own server, which isn't a container, and we really need to boot an OS? What do we do?
Like us as a company, or like
Yeah.
hypothetical? Yeah. So I mean, if we did need to do that, we would probably consider NixOS for that. But we also we'll be saying more about this in a future
Yeah.
webinar. And also, if you are in a predicament like that, if you like you want to run Nix built production systems, but NixOS is maybe not quite the ticket for you. You want something, maybe something in between, like that thin Docker image and full blown NixOS. So we are going to say more about this in the future, and feel free to reach out to us at the that hello@determinate.systems email address.
Yeah, we have
Sorry
something pretty.
for being
Yeah.
cryptic there, but we're just not quite ready to say more about that just yet.
Yeah, but we are happy to have one-on-one conversations about it now. I think I've actually mentioned it in the last two webinars that, or not webinars, sorry, the last two newsletters that we do have something pretty interesting in the works. So happy to have some conversations with folks if they have a need for an alternative to NixOS. We'd love to hear your thoughts there. You talked early in the webinar about, Rust and Go and occasionally Python. There's also a lot of folks talk about Python with the Nix ecosystem. And when I say talk, I mean complain. Like, do we as a team find Python to be substantially different to manage compared to like Rust and Go when it comes to Nix?
Yeah, I'd say so. So we haven't thought a ton about our own internal Python stuff just because we only use it a little bit. Python I think generally tends to be a pain for people because there's so many different ways to do things and so much fragmentation inside the ecosystem. Some people some people on pip, some people using new hotness like UV. I think that, you know, we generally gravitate towards UV, which I think presents a potential kind of solution to a lot of the, you know, many decades of headaches in Python world. And I would definitely recommend looking into those new approaches. But yeah, you know, I've had it on my to-do list for a long time to explore Python a lot more and to kind of crystallize whatever I find out there into a blog post or maybe even some docs or something like that. But I don't have super concrete recommendations yet. And whatever we're doing internally right now for Python is probably not a great model for others to follow.
Yeah. Well, you're getting a lot of agreement in the chat around UV. So
Yeah.
it sounds like that
Yeah.
is a popular one.
Yeah,
Um,
my initial poking and prodding with UV and Nix together has been pretty unambiguously successful, I'd
yeah.
say.
Yeah. Is there anything that Determinate does that is awesome but uncommon, and you're surprised like more companies don't do it, or you wish more companies would do?
Gosh. Let me think. Let me think about that for a second. Like what is I guess I'm wondering if the question is like stuff we do internally that's nice to have, or if it's more like, that's a good question. I mean, the very the like the obvious answer is that I've just never been in a company that used Nix before. Like like every
Mhm.
company I've ever worked for has been, you know, the standard you know, here's a README and you do make setup and then you do make build and everything like that. You know, one company, and I worked for Twitter back in the day in 2015, 2016, you know, long before you know, Elon takeover or whatever. And we had a full team of like I think we had 25 or 30 people that were just like the developer productivity team. And it was really cool to have access to that. You know, people thinking about the problems of your everyday work in a way that that you may not be equipped to. But you know, I can't help but suspect that with Nix at their disposal, we probably would have been able to cut that team
Yeah.
down, or at least make, you know, at least you know, enable that team to focus their efforts a little bit differently. So yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, that's a very simple kind of, you know, answer. But I think it, yeah, working for a Nix company where you just assume that everything is in Nix I would say that's been transformative for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll add to that and say, like, the flip side of that is that as much as we love to use Nix and we do want to use it in the areas that it's a difference maker, we don't mandate it everywhere, and we see that a lot when we talk to prospects and customers where it's they want to try to use Nix for everything, and then there's one thing where it's not great at, and it's like, oh well, this just throws it all off, and it's like, no, like you don't have to use Nix for absolutely everything. And for us, I think we have a bit of a litmus test for like when should we use Nix. And we always want to try to do something with Nix, but if it's a headache, like we need to stop and just say, look, Nix is not the goal. The goal is something beyond the tooling. If Nix is the best tool for it, great, but we're also the first to say when it's not. Um,
Hmm.
and so I think that's the thing I'd like to see companies think about more is like you can adopt Nix more modularly. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. So,
Yeah, yeah, and that's something that we talked about in the first webinar. The best practices is like incremental adoption is huge. You know, you can just start on, you know, do a development environment for one team and start from there, and then, you know, get 5 teams doing development environments that
yeah,
way, expand out into package builds and so on and so forth. It doesn't have to be a top-down directive at all.
yeah, yeah. All right, so I'm going to ask you a question now that is from me and not from our attendees.
Okay.
And I would love for you to wrap up by sharing what's something that's on our roadmap. Whether that's for Determinate Nix or Flake Hub. What's something that's on our roadmap that you're really excited to use? Like something we're going to build to make Nix better that you can't wait to get your hands on.
Yeah. So as a full-time Mac OS person, you know, I've the native Linux builder is going to be really nice. So basically what we're doing in a future version of Determinate Nix, and you know, it should be out there very soon, is basically more recent versions of Mac OS had this like built-in virtualization framework that you can call using some, you know, pretty straightforward Swift code. And so we basically are going to build that into Nix. So, there are lots of there are plenty of like potential solutions to doing Linux stuff, or to making Linux stuff available to Macs. You can obviously push things to the cache. You can run a remote builder. I mean, cross compilation is for Mac, and like that's never really worked that well for me. But in this particular case, yeah, you're just going to get like Linux builds out of the box, and it'll be for both x86 64 and AR64 at the same time. You're going to get that all at once. The builds are not going to be blazing fast, at least at first, but I think in cases where you just need to like fill a gap, or you need to build, especially in the case of Docker images, which have to be for Linux, and this is a real pain point for Mac OS folks sometimes. I think I think it's going to be a big win. So yeah.
Yeah, awesome. I'm glad that's what you said. That's what I was hoping you would share. I was planting that
Yeah,
question, hoping you
of
would
course,
mention
of
the
course, of
native
course.
Linux
I've
builds.
been, yeah, I've been
Uh,
pestering the higher ups to do native Linux builds on Mac OS for a long time.
yeah,
So
yeah. Yeah, so for anyone else that might be interested in that, that is coming soon. I got to see that in action on Graham's machine this last week when we were on site with some customers. And it is just such a quality of life improvement. It just makes your workflow so much easier when you're developing on Mac. It is performant enough. It's not going to be as fast as like a big beefy build server, but wow, it just totally changes your workflow in such a nice, natural way. So if you're using Mac and you want native Linux builds, email us at hello@determinate.systems, or jump into our Discord, let us know, and we'll let you be one of the first people to try it, which we should be able to do, literally in days. And then we'll roll it out to all of our users of Determinate Nix over the next few weeks after some initial private beta. So, all right. Well, we are a little bit longer than we even thought. So I'm going to wrap us up. Thank you, everybody, for joining. We really appreciate your time and your interest in what we're doing. Like I said earlier, this has been recorded, so I will be uploading that to YouTube and sharing out a link using Luma to send that out to everybody. We don't have a specific webinar topic yet for our next one. So if there's something you would like to have us talk about or address or explore or anything, please let us know. Let us know in our Discord community. Let us know by emailing us or adding to the chat here before we end this session, and we can see about trying to address the topics that you want to hear about next time. And then finally, if you need some help developing a Nix strategy for your organization, if you'd like to talk to somebody about how you're using Nix, how you're approaching it, or how you might use it, let us know. We are happy to jump on a call to hear your use cases, to hear your problems, and give you some advice on some of the things that you might consider doing to make your life and the lives of your colleagues and your teams easier. So again, that's hello@determinate.systems, and we'll get back to you and set something up. All right, that is all for us today. Thank you again, everyone, for joining. Be on the lookout for this link in your email soon, and we will see you for our next one. And have a great rest of your Tuesday or Wednesday if you're in Australia.